Welcome to the Trend Report. I'm glad you're here today for what I know is going to be a fascinating conversation with my guest today, Paul Anderson with Applied Excellence. Hey, Paul, how are you?
I'm really good. Really good to see you. Glad to be on the show.
Well, I'm really glad to have you. So, Paul, would you take just a minute, please, and introduce yourself and tell our audience who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm founder of a company called Applied Excellence and the SalesPro University. I'm also a Go-Giver certified speaker and coach. And really my focus in life is all about people development and company progression. That's what is passionate for me, and that's what drives me forward.
So I really like that people development because I'm a huge fan of development and growth, and then company progression. I think that's very, very clear. So, Paul, how long have you been doing Applied Excellence? How long have you had your programs?
So Applied Excellence started out as the SalesPro University. My world in furniture, as you're aware, started with HumanScale and then transitioned to HighMark, and we rebranded HighMark as a company that had a really generic office chair to HighMark Seating Made Simple. And then the company was getting ready to be acquired or purchased. We didn't know what was going to happen. So I started the SalesPro University as an online sort of sales training company because I've had success in showing people really how to reinforce and position products and services and be able to communicate and sell them correctly. That's how HighMark really became what it was, selling differentiation.
Sure.
So the SalesPro University evolved, and then I sort of got into speaking through the Go-Giver, which I'm more than happy to go into, which is sort of reinforcing that foundational principle of putting others before yourself and adding value to their world. And so when OFS came along to purchase HighMark, I was going to continue with the SalesPro University, but then it seemed like there was a good fit with me with OFS and the cultural alignment to help develop their culture. So I evolved that. And then as I left OFS, I transitioned to Applied Excellence because people were saying, hey, this is great online training, but do you come into my company and help me with my company strategy and in-person training? So Applied Excellence encapsulated really company as well as sales and leadership and business. So That's how it evolved, 2017.
Awesome. So you mentioned your journey in our industry a little bit. So you joined HumanScale in 2002, if I remember correctly?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Excellent. And so
boom, straight into HumanScale.
Thanks for the notes too that I have that said when you joined HumanScale, because I didn't remember without the notes. But so you started out at HumanScale, then to HighMark. So what actually, Paul, what actually brought you into our industry?
Great question. Great. Funny story. I was working outside of the industry. I had worked in England for a company called Pitney Bowes, and was headhunted because I was their top sales guy. I was headhunted by Nearpost, who was their competitor in this country. I had an American passport because I was born here. So we transitioned over to Nearpost, and Nearpost had a recruitment guy called Ira Samolo, bless his heart, who had been there for like 15 years. That was my go-to person for, when I needed hiring needs. And he suddenly left in like 2001, 2002. And I'm like, where did Ira go? I need people. And a few months later, I got a call from Ira, and Ira said, Paul, how are you doing? I said, I'm great. Where are you? He said, I'm at a company called HumanScale. I'm like, you're weighing people? What?
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah, what are you doing? Well, what are you doing? So he said, hey, they want to talk to you. So long story short, I met with the president and the vice president at the time, jumped into HumanScale, had a really interesting sort of 3 years there before I transitioned to HighMark.
So what I appreciate about that story the most is the power of connection.
Yeah.
And you met someone that you were working with that thought very highly of you, then transitioned to a different company and still remembered you. And that connection, that networking is actually what got you to the next position, which, very much so led you to where you are today. So I think it highlights the importance of building strong connections with people.
Oh, it's huge. And even more importantly, there was 3 evens there. Even more importantly, in today's world where, there's a need for us to get back to the human element. I love the book Reset by Johnny Taylor. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, the CEO of SHRM. But what he reinforces is that post-COVID, there's been this huge shift back to the human in the workplace and away from processes and procedures. They're always important. But how can you ever ignore the human element, right? I mean, our ability to connect with another human being and really add value to their world and put their interests first and treat them as a human being, especially in today's world, it always pays back. It always pays back. That's really the principle of my teaching.
Yeah.
But yeah, connections is critical.
Yeah. I mean, they're important, I think, in a lot of different aspects in our life and our career, whether it's from a job or support, maybe when you need it most, or, you know, sometimes just an encouraging ear to somebody to listen to your story or to provide encouragement to you from their experience along their journey. So I think they're very, very important. So HumanScale, then to HighMark, and then you're at HighMark, and you did some really, really fun things at HighMark. I mean, you kind of brought this marketing to a new level, didn't you?
Well, I had a chair. I had a lollipop chair. It was like, hey, Paul, you've gone from HumanScale, this beautiful product, you know, everything about sort of difficulty inhibiting use and intuitive technology. And then suddenly it's like, I'm sorry, Paul, you've gone where? And it's like, I've gone to HighMark. Like, okay, that's that round back, round seat chair with no intuitive technology. I'm like, that's right. And why'd you do that? I said, well, you know, because I feel like it impact HighMark in a different way than HumanScale. I could reinforce the culture there. So yeah, I had to do some different things. So what to reinforce marketing, we've really focused on bringing that intuitive technology where you sit in the chair and it actually, you know, hasn't got to have paddles and levers and tension adjustment, and started to promote that at a mid-market price as a better ergonomic solution. And to get the message out, what could I do? Let's put the chair on a surfboard, show what it can do. Let's put it on a Harley Davidson, you know. Let's just put it in these different environments. And so suddenly it became, hey, Paul, you know, that surfing chair, can I have a quote on that surfing chair? So yeah, I had to do something.
Well, I think what I really appreciate about it, Paul, is how you got creative. And this was years ago when we didn't need to be creative in marketing. We just needed to have a brochure and a price book and some nice images, and you were pretty much off to the races. But you were pioneering a new brand and you had to be different. And I love the creativity around what can we do to make HighMark and the chair stand out, because that parallels till today.
Right.
In a different way, because every business, every brand, whether you sell office furniture or copiers or, you know, it doesn't matter what you sell, you have to stand out in some way. You've got to marketing really, to a degree, marketing should be in front of sales with what it's doing, because so much of what is bought today is around brand awareness.
Yeah, you know, I think the two are blending together. I heard many years ago that sort of from a marketing expert saying sales is going to be the past. It's going to be all about marketing. And I'm like, you crazy? But really, in many ways, you've got to blend the two. And, you know, a salesperson's job, a professional salesperson is all about, and a company needs to look at it, is all about how can we create better ways to add value, right? Yeah. How can we create differentiation and support our differentiation? And the big element, which is missing, which actually surprised me. I remember in my early days at HighMark, 2006, 2007, when I was out promoting HighMark, and you're saying about this pioneering a new brand, I was actually pioneering an old brand into a new one in a sense, and then trying to evolve it. But I remember being in Philadelphia, preparing the night before for a dealer presentation the next morning. And I thought, you know, I'm going to go on their website and find out sort of who is this dealership. And so this is beautiful culture that was reinforcing their values, their principles. And so I'm going to incorporate this into the presentation. So the next morning I start my presentation. I was like, who is this company? And it was like, oh, that's Microsoft. Oh, that's Intel. Or it's Apple. I'm like, this is you. like, and it was like the president of the dealership, I'll never forget it, stopped and said, hey guys, this is really bad. We don't even see what our own values are. And I'm like, you know, often we don't take time to stop and just look and reflect back on, one, who we are, and two, how we're different and what we can do to create even more energy around that differentiation. That's exactly what we had to do at HighMark, and that's what I'm now teaching and training on. Absolutely.
Well, today I think it's been accelerated. It's even more important to be sure that you understand your value proposition, what makes you different. Why do people want to do business with you? And I think a lot of companies struggle with articulating that in a very clear and concise way. And it's so important because, especially in the office furniture industry, we've got a competitor pretty much on every corner. And
yeah, we do.
the competition is steep.
We do. And, the competition is on every corner, but the competition is internal as well.
Yeah.
You've got a company that is not worried about really putting in an energy and a focus and some time and investment on that aspect of who are we and how are we different. And then you bring into the workforce that you've got this mixed generation of younger people, 35, 40 years old, 25 years old. And those are the generations that are actually wanting more of a sense of identity. It means more to them than it actually does to me. I'm not saying that my generation X stage that, what the values and principles of company are and how we're different weren't important, but it was just like, hey, let's just get our job done. Well, now it's even more to get retention and sustainment of those key players. It's even more important to reinforce our differentiation. Let's just look at Apple. And this is why Apple have done such a phenomenal job, right? Where they're sort of, hey, we are different. This is where so there's a brand awareness. People want to be part of that connected. You mentioned connectivity. That part of that connected sort of awareness of identity and differentiation that is so important nowadays. And so I look at the younger generation and say, hey, you know what? We thought it was important before. We think it's important from a competitive standpoint. People we're hiring need to be understanding of what the values, principles, and differentiation are and how to articulate them too. Yeah. If you want to keep them for any longer than 2 years.
Absolutely. And that retention of employees is a challenge all businesses face. And keeping them from job hopping. And though we call it, you and I, because we're our generation, we call it job hopping. They don't refer to it that way. They don't see it as job hopping.
No,
and they see it 2 years is actually to them is a long time.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? It's actually recognized. There's this trend. And I mentioned this book, Reset by Johnny Taylor. It's interesting because it's all this research that was done post-COVID on what was now sort of being needed and looked at, and the human element is key. But also that sort of pool of talent is now being broadened, where people and companies are now looking not just at where people have come from their university. There's more equity and more sort of aware, appreciation of equality in the marketplace, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, absolutely. It's critical to get a better understanding of how you're positioning yourself, how the company is positioning themselves, and how someone is going to be attracted towards that to retain those people. And if we're not holding an educational element or a future progression element in front of a younger person, then why should they stay? If they don't know what's going to happen in 3 or 4 years, if they don't know what their role is in the entire part of the company, if they're not being educated, I think a recent study was by Statista, 61% of millennials say that they believe learning is the key to their success in their career. And yet 51% of millennials say they would like to learn new skills. And yet who's really focusing on that? So you've got the 60% of people saying, hey, I think it's really important that I'm learning new skills in my career. And what skills are they being taught? Right? I mean, so we're so busy with this traditional mindset on, hey, that's not important. I want people with a book of business. I want people to be able to already have an understanding of this line. I'm not going to train them, develop them. And yet this younger generation, 50% of the workforce, are saying, hey, I would like to be trained. I would like to be educated. And also, hey, I think it's important. So if we're looking at retention and we're looking at having an impact to the revenue and the profitability of our company, education is critical.
I love this topic, and I'm glad that we went here because I can get on my soapbox about this for sure. Because I think uniquely in our industry, and I love the statistics, by the way, and thank you so much for sharing them. But I believe that in our industry, we devalue education and we see it as an expense versus an investment. And I'm genericizing. So those of you that are listening that invest in yourself or your company invest in you, don't get mad at me. I'm genericizing, but generally, I think it's very true across the industry and a variety of different things that companies don't invest in their employees and they don't provide that education and that learning. But yet that younger generation, as you talked about, the millennials are coming into the workforce. And it's one of the, I believe truly, this is one of the reasons that we have such a struggle in our industry at recruiting and retaining new and young talent, because we don't do this and we don't offer these programs for education and growth.
Yeah, it's like a time, money, and mind share, right? That's what you look at, and that's what you potentially value the most at the end of the year when you look at your taxes. Where did I spend my time, my money, and my mind share? And education is usually the last thing. So, oh, we don't need to because we're just really self-governing. We're going along, and then we're gradually losing people. And then what type of culture is that? I mean, this is one of the keys that really, when I think back to HighMark, we had the excitement and the silly things that I was doing, if you would call them silly, to get attention. But at the same time, there was an education around why this chair was on a surfboard, because it didn't have a tension knob sticking out at the bottom, so it could be flat on a surfboard, right? Mm-hmm. So education, if you're educating, I believe you never go out of business. Mm-hmm. I believe you attract the best people. There's no question there. And if we're then focusing this topic on just the larger part of the workforce, they're crying out for it. And yet the traditionalists and Generation X who are perhaps running businesses are going, that's not important. And then wondering why they're losing people.
Well, one of the things that I hear a lot, Paul, is we don't have time. Yeah, we're busy. Our sales are good. And, there was a time the last couple of years, sales dipped really bad. Now they're coming back to a degree. They are coming back and people are busy. And even today, I mean, I heard it before the 2020 lockdown, and then I'm hearing it even now. We just don't have time. And I look at that and go, how do you not have time? How do you not have time to invest in yourself?
Well, where I have to go back to Stephen Covey's quadrant of time management. Yep. And, we're all focusing on what's urgent and important, right? And yet apparently strategy and where a lot of the money is made when all of the research comes into it is on that second quadrant, right? On what's important but not urgent. Mm-hmm. And really that's where we fall. We fall, hey, this is important but not urgent. And so when do you make it important, right? When people are leaving the door, when revenue isn't coming down, what is it that's going to trigger and connect to somebody to go, hey, we have to. And if you look at the trend of all of the companies that are, just doing exceptionally well, they do make it important because it isn't just important for the employees and the culture of the company, that it's an educational teaching culture, but also it's important to the bottom line, because if we're educating people, it's just taking time to stop. Yep. Okay, right. We've been doing what we've been doing. Is it getting us where we're wanting to go? Mm-hmm. And ultimately, usually the answer is no, not ideally. And so how can you make that? Well, let's start investing in our people. Let's start really controlling the time that they're out, but also supporting and controlling the time that we're educating them so they can actually, one, reinforce our brand and appreciation for where they're working, and two, help to produce and progress more business. So when is the time? If you don't make the time now, when is the time going to be?
That's a great question right there. But I also believe that the training has to be beyond the processes and the products. So beyond the products that you sell and beyond the processes in your organization, it has to be well beyond that. In fact, those people that are frequent listeners to the podcast have heard me say this before. I believe that product is secondary in what you need to know in our industry. Specifically in our industry, I believe we should be industry experts and not product experts, because the products are all very genericized. So you don't get mad at me, those of you listening, but you've heard me say this before, but a chair is a chair is a chair. I know there are differences, and I know there's some that do this and some that do that, but they serve basically the same function, right? But if we understand our industry and we understand the trends in our industry and what's happening in our industry, then we're better sellers. And the product actually doesn't play as big of a role as it does if we become industry experts rather than product experts. A good example of this would be, and I'll just use the chair, is let's say you're working with somebody that wants to be sure that biophilic design elements are incorporated into their space. Well, if you don't know what biophilic design is, which it's a lot more than putting a plant like that one right there in your office. It's a lot more than that. And if you don't know the role that a chair can play in supporting biophilic design, then you really don't understand our industry. Because what you need to know is how a chair can support the customer's desire for a biophilic space. That's what I mean about being an industry expert rather than a product expert. That makes sense?
Oh, yeah. That's why we call it professional selling and not just selling, right? I mean, it's a profession. And if you want to make it and get the rewards of the profession, you've absolutely got to be more understanding of the more holistic aspect of what is around your product. You've actually touched on a really critical point in today's world, which is this transition from what many people are calling, well, what we've called solution selling to what many people are calling insight selling. And solution selling is that typical, I ask my questions, I get an understanding of what you want, and then I tell you I can answer it in the way you need it, and then I've got a value add. Insight, and there's a really awesome study done by Chief Customer Counsel on this that was taking 400 people from the University of Toronto, I believe, and really reinforcing how important is this adding insight into the conversation going to dictate the decision-making in B2B. And so they did this study that was reinforcing someone that was going through bad times, bad industry, needed some financial money to inject into their business. And they said, okay, there's going to be an unconsidered need that we need to that you're going to reinforce in your presentation to one of the groups. At the beginning of the presentation, this is what you're going to make people aware of, and then go into how you can help them. And then the next group was, okay, you're going to actually go into the presentation and just tell and reinforce how you can meet their needs. And at the end of it, tell them an unconsidered thought they may not have thought about. And the last two groups, just do your normal solution selling. And the result came back, and the group that reinforced this insight, which is really what you're saying, you know, hey, Sid, before I get started, are you aware of the trends that are happening in biophilic design and how they're impacting the culture of a company and the environment that we work in? Because today it's becoming more and more important, and 70% of people or whatever are reinforcing that as a key factor. Are you aware of that? If you're mentioning something like that at the beginning, well, I hadn't thought about biophilic design and how important that was and the sort of granularity materials that are being used. If you've made me think about that now, you've immediately added value to the interaction. And that value has a absolute sort of monetary element. One, it actually in the studies have reinforced that 11%, it's influenced more than 11% of people to make the decision on that presentation.
Wow.
The person that has actually reinforced this insight at the beginning. So if you want to make and we get commitment of getting an 11% better closing ratio, even when price is more, this is one way of doing it. And if you want to make your presentation 42% more unique, then just add this insight before you go into the presentation. And that's exactly what the results are sharing. And I've taught this for the last couple of years. And it's fascinating when people, even if it's an RFP, hasn't even got to be a physical presentation or virtual, but when they position this insight that's something to do with the industry or the world that somebody hadn't considered or had undervalued, this absolutely is another way of reinforcing the value of what you're bringing to that interaction. So it's right on line with what you're saying.
All right. So I'm going to reframe a couple of these things just to kind of simplify them. Those people that shared insights, knowledge about their industry or knowledge about the impact of certain things, as you example is trends in the industry, increased their sales by 11% by just sharing those insights.
Yeah, just at the right time.
Yeah.
So again, we're talking relevancy, right? It has to be relevant to the person they're talking to. So they're adding an insight that is obviously relevant because they know it is to the person they're talking to.
Sure.
But it's really something the person they're talking to, the buyer, hadn't considered. Like, oh, thank you, Sid. I hadn't considered that. Just presenting that at the beginning instead of going into your normal questions and then this is my solution. That's called insight. I'm adding insight. And the more we know about our industry, to your point, the more we know about what's happening and coming down the road, making people aware of what's happening and coming down the road. Could you imagine the salesperson that would have said to Microsoft, you know, there could be a pandemic, you know, coming down the road. And one of the things you want to be aware of if that happens is, and we have a solution that said that in 2019. I wonder who the first person Microsoft would have called in 2020, right?
No, it's a really, really great point.
Yeah. The more we get, and this is another aspect of why it's professional selling, not just selling, because we've got to make it, relevant, meaningful, and we've got to be creative on what we bring to every interaction, and that's what's going to make the difference.
I absolutely love it, and I think it's so powerful the way you're saying it and what you're sharing, and it honestly for me just confirms a lot of the things that I've been talking about for quite some time. You have the statistics to back it up, but you get established as an influencer, if you will, a knowledgeable resource, a go-to resource in the industry. And that's what you want. We know we sell products. We have to sell products to make money, but the products will come. They will buy. We need to position ourselves better as professional sellers. And I think that's super important. And I know the answer to this question already. Okay. I
Then
think
don't ask it. Then don't
yeah,
ask
no,
it.
no,
Put it up, no.
no. But, and well, yes, I believe I know the answer. Let me frame that. I believe I know the answer to this question already. But why did you get into training? Why training?
Because it was easy for me to do
Mm-hmm.
because my focus has always been on people.
Mm-hmm.
So the default of where I've always gone is training and educating whoever it is that I'm talking to, right? And if
Yep.
I've got information that can make another person's life better, or that can add some further value to a customer that's thinking about buying something, then that's what I want to be doing. It's just a default of passion. And training people, when you see somebody, and it could be a project designer, it could be a customer support person, it might not be somebody even directly in the field of sales I'm selling, that you are reinforcing some thought to into how to handle a difficult conversation, or how to elevate a conversation and the value of what they're bringing to that conversation, how to make that presentation that they're reinforcing just a little bit better and a little bit more engaging. When you see the results of that, you can't, there is no better fulfillment in my life. I mean, there isn't. So training for me was a natural default, because people say, how do you do it, Paul? How do you do it? How do I do what? Well, how are you getting the success you're getting? How did you close that deal? Or how are you getting sort of more response there? I don't know. Let me think about this. And so you sort of think about it and you start writing it out, and then you share it, and then people are getting the same success. Like, whoa, okay, I'm enjoying this. The
Sure.
reward is so fulfilling. That's what led me to training.
So, and I understood that, and I can hear the passion in your voice when you talk about training and being able to support others along their journey and educate people. It's very clear that you really, really enjoy what you do. So started at SalesPro University, migrated into applied excellence in 2017. So now here we are about to be in 2022. Tell us about the impact that you've had and how many students and some of the things that you actually really train on, some of the courses you offer.
Yeah. It's interesting when you think back to when post. So we go 2015. HighMark acquired by OFS. SalesPro University starts. First year we were on 1,000 students, 1,200 students, which I thought was great. Mm-hmm. And then we go 2018, 2019. We got 7,000 students. Then we go 2020 and through 2021. The end of last year, we're at 21,000 students. So we literally doubled in a year. And the funny and interesting fact on that, which again I've shared earlier, is that younger generation of people, 74% of the people are in that age group under 40 years old. They want to learn. They want it quick. They want it to be relevant, meaningful, and they don't want it to be encapsulated around all of the silly stories and nuances that are nothing to do with what they've come to learn.
Yep.
And that's why micro-learnings have been so, I think, impactful. If you look at enrollments, our enrollments for the 21,000 people, we've had 24,000 enrollments. You've got literally 85% people are actually active on there. That's unheard of. And, it has its ups and downs, but
sure.
Bottom line, it's evolved well. And now we're evolving to sort of not just the sales, but culture. Culture is just such a key factor. Your values, your principles, what reinforce your culture. So now the transition of sort of the SalesPro University and Applied Excellence is now sort of evolving more to helping people understand how to communicate their culture. What is the culture of the company they work for? How do you communicate it? And then you talked about connected sort of works, connectivity earlier. Well, I'm talking about connecting with the people that you're wanting to partner with, right?
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Well, this is the culture of us as a dealership, us as a company. This is your culture that I gleaned from the website. Let me share with you how our cultures align and why it might be good for us to do business, right? And based on the fact that we have common ground. That's one of the trainings that has done really, really well. Selling Essentials, which is that basic element of appreciation and understanding that it's not just about when someone says, does it come in blue? If I can do it in blue, can we move forward? That's old school sales.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, this is now about cultural alignment, connection, emotional connection. And I think that's why the trainings have done so well, because it appeals to that mindset of people that are now in the workforce and wanting to know more about relevant.
Well, it's really exciting. 21,000 students that are in part of your programs. So, Paul, if you could put them in big buckets, what are the big topics that your trainings revolve around?
Culture is a big one. So
Okay.
number
Sales,
one is
culture.
So
Okay.
selling essentials, which is that fundamentals of sales. How do you build rapport, and how do you reinforce belief? Because again, that's the rainmaker. How do you reinforce belief in what you're selling, and why is that important? And then how do you establish trust? Those are the basic elements of selling essentials that come into every single person's world, regardless of whether in sales. Then you've got how to outsell the competition, which is mastering your sales pitch and handling objections appropriately. And then you've got the sort of strategic questioning, which is a third element, which is, how do you ask the right questions that are meaningful to the person that you're talking to, not just to the fact that you're getting answers that are important to you, but you're making them think about problems and issues that they perhaps hadn't thought about. Those are the big three. So selling fundamentals, selling essentials, and then outsell the competition with that, mastering your presentation and keeping it engaging and dynamic, handling objections, then closing the sale and strategic questions. That's the key element.
So most of them are revolved around sales, which is great.
Yeah, they are. Now, what's really moving up actually rapidly this last 7 or 8 months has been leadership, which is reinforcing excellence in leadership by adding value and building your people, standing for something, and then holding the vision, all those things. And then I'd say after that comes business excellence, which is reinforcing the go-giver philosophy and how to reinforce adding value to the world. That's a big one.
So sales, leadership, business excellence are the biggest categories. Now, are these courses that you offer available for individuals to purchase, or are they only available for companies in large?
No, individuals and companies. Individuals and companies. Yeah, no, I mean, hey, we want to help every single person that needs the help. So let's not make it over expensive. Let's not make it difficult to access. Let's make it mobile friendly. Let's also make it so it can be customizable, so that people then go on, they spend whatever money it is they want to reinvest in themselves, and then they've learned something in a short snippet of a micro learning, and then there's perhaps a small exercise that allows them to customize to their particular situation. Let's bring some animation into the equation so that it's not just me talking like this, but there's some animation going on and some different ways of stimulation, and then questions and quiz questions. So I've made it so that it's accessible to individuals. And obviously there's a corporate program where a corporate company could take it on and have reporting capabilities and assignments that they progress to.
That's awesome. So if our listeners are interested, Paul, in finding more about your courses and seeing exactly which ones, where should they go? What website should they go to?
The SalesProUniversity.com.
All right. We'll drop the link to that into the show notes. We're also going to drop the link to the book Reset by Johnny Taylor that you mentioned a few minutes ago. We'll drop that into the show notes. And then we'll also gain some information about the Stephen Covey quadrant that you mentioned as well, and put a link to that into the show notes. So if everybody can go and research that and to see exactly what you're talking about on those two things. Paul, I've absolutely enjoyed this conversation. So much value added here. It's really nice to be able to talk to somebody that has the same passion for education and learning that I do, because I think it is so critical and important. If our community would like to get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Paul@appliedexcellence.com.
All right. We'll be sure to drop his email address there. Paul, are you on LinkedIn?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. We'll put your LinkedIn profile there. Sure. And all of you that are frequent listeners know that if you do reach out to Paul directly, please be sure you let him know that you heard him right here on the Trend Report, which is why you're reaching out. Paul, I really, really appreciate you joining me today. It's been a great conversation.
Boom! Always refreshing. Thank you for the chance to have this platform to share a little bit about my world and hopefully add value to others.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm just going to say to everybody in the audience listening, you just met somebody that has more energy than me. So
go bigger.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, Paul, thanks again. It was a pleasure to see you, and go out there and make today great. And we'll see you next week.
Awesome. Have a good one.